Hello, welcome to the tutorial for the Southwick skirt. If you don't already have the pattern, the link is in the description. We're going to start with the centre back panel and the side back panels. There should be notches here and there should be double little snips there, two together because it's a back panel. The back of the garment usually has double notches. So find those first. Place your back panel and your side back panel together and pin. Then you're going to stitch a centimetre from the raw edges, centimetre seam allowance on all my patterns unless otherwise stated. Little back tack at the beginning there, stitch all the way down to the hem matching those notches, and a back tack at the end. There we go. Overlock or zigzag, whichever your chosen seam finish. Press the seam open and then repeat for the other side back panel. Again, find your notches, pin it, stitch it, overlock it, press it. There you have one back skirt. Next process, pocket bag. This is my side front panel, the lower part, and my pocket bag, which I've just cut out of a scrap of poplin, and I've put a little strip of interfacing, you'll see there, along the top of the pocket. I felt this fabric was very light and a little bit prone to stretching and fraying, so I would just stabilise it with a little piece along the top there. So a centimetre seam allowance again, stitch along the top of your pocket. You can see the stitching goes through that little scrap of interfacing just to hold it a bit more securely. I'm trimming down my pocket. Not necessary really in this light fabric, but if you're using something slightly heavier it can become a bit bulky, so it's better to grade it. Now I'm edge stitching. I've opened up my pocket and I'm pulling my seam allowance towards the pocket bag. So that's towards the print fabric, and I've stitched it to the print fabric. And now I'm going to fold it and press it. Putting that edge stitching on gives a really nice crisp edge. There it is, it's been pressed. Repeat for the other pocket. Now for the next part of the pocket. This is the skirt part of the pocket. You can see my notches, check they're all there. Great. Now I'm going to check the notches on here as well. This is the side seam, so there should be notches in it. Great. Just having a good look at those ones, make sure they're all there. My fabric's fraying like anything, so they're disappearing by the second. Now we want to match up the bottom because they form the pocket bag together, so match your cotton pocket lining to your skirt piece. That notch should match the top of that pocket edge. So pin these together, stitch across a centimetre seam allowance as usual. And give it an overlock or a zigzag so that your hands don't go all the way through your pocket. Fantastic. Now we need to again match that notch to the top of the pocket, and we want to stitch all those three layers together. Holding them together with a stay stitch will help a lot when you're attaching the other parts of the skirt to these seams. Don't panic if the top bit is wider than the bottom bit, it should be. That's to allow you to get your hand in. So keeping those edges together, stay stitch, i.e. a nice large stitch just to hold them together securely. I tend to do it a bit less than a centimetre so I don't have to unpick any stay stitching that might creep through. Literally just to hold it all together so it's easier for doing your other seams. There we go, keep those all lined up. That is one pocket. It's all sealed up, nice space for your hand to get in there so there's no tightness when you put your hands in your pockets, and a pretty little lining on the inside there. Repeat for the other pocket. Next job is to stitch these side fronts with the pockets onto the centre front panels. You can see I've put interfacing down my centre front there and left a centimetre seam allowance free of the interfacing, just again to reduce the bulk a little bit. Now I'm going to find those notches. Should be single notches as it's the front of the garment. There we go, match them up. This is where you'll be super pleased you've done your stay stitching. So it'll be holding all those layers together rather than having to fiddle with lots of different layers all in one place. Give it a pin and then stitch centimetre seam allowance all the way from the waist to the hem. Back tack at the end. There it is, centimetre seam allowance stitched. We're going to overlock it and press that open now. There we go, nice neat seam. Nice and crisp on the outside, still room to put a hand in the pocket. Repeat for the other side. Next up is the button stands. Centre fronts I've marked with a little notch for my seam allowance and then 4 centimetres in for my stand. I'm going to press this before I stitch it, so I'm going to press a centimetre back and then I'm going to press it back 4 centimetres so that I can stitch it all the way down nice and easily. There we go, pin it and tack it if you feel you need to. I'm just going to stitch right on the edge there. This is an opportunity really to get creative with top stitching if you fancy it. Use different colour threads, you can do double stitching, you can do decorative stitch. I've just kept mine simple for now. There we go, it's stitched over. Nice, looks alright on the front. That's one front done. Repeat the other side. So now we're going to attach the skirt fronts to the back. As you can see, I've already overlocked my side seams. My fabric was fraying, so I thought rather than watch it disintegrate, I would overlock it first and then do my seam. If you choose to do this, do mark your notches with chalk or a pin or something. Centimetre seam allowance all the way down the side, matching those seams all the way to the bottom. Quick back tack, press it open, there we go, nice and neat on the inside. Looks lovely and crisp on the outside. Repeat for the other side seam. Now for the waistband. Now I choose to do mine this way. You're obviously welcome to use whichever method you find easier. I like to put the right side of my waistband to the wrong side of my skirt. I'm going to overlap that 1 centimetre seam allowance so it goes beyond the centre front by 1 centimetre and start pinning. So I'm pinning the waistband to the inside of my skirt. Again, overlap that 1 centimetre seam allowance past the centre front on the other end. I'm going to stitch that on now. Quick back tack and away we go. That's it stitched on. That's what it looks like on the inside. And now I'm going to pull this seam allowance up and press it up towards the waistband, making sure that's pulled nice and taut. There we go, that's pressed upwards, so it's nice and smooth that side. And I've also pressed my seam allowance all the way around. Look, I've got 1 centimetre at there and at the long edge, short edge. I'm going to fold it down like this now, and then fold it in half, and then I will stitch on the right side very close to the edge, just along by that fold there. Again, pin, tack, whatever you feel you need to do to make it easier for you. I'm sewing down that short side first. Pivot, and then off we go along that long fold. There we go. Just need to press it now. Again, if you want to top stitch it, go ahead. I've just kept it simple for the tutorial. Set right over left, looking good. Time for the hem. Okay, now on this one, I'm going to fold it up 1 centimetre and then fold it up again. I felt this slightly deeper hem was nice for this style. I'm usually a fan of overlock it and stitch it up because it's bulk free, but on this one it seemed to suit a turn and turn hem. So I've pressed that, and now I'm going to stitch it all along. Again, pin or tack if you need to. That's it stitched. Give it another press and you're good to go. Buttonhole placement. Now I'm going to show you how I choose to place my buttons and buttonholes. That's my button I'm going to have at the top. Place it sort of fairly centrally on the waistband so that it looks nice. You can see this one's got a shank, and I'm going to put a pin right at the edge of the shank because that's where my buttonhole needs to start. That's where I want it to sit. Now measure halfway between each edge of my waistband and put another pin in, so that where those two pins cross, albeit wonkily, is where the start of my buttonhole needs to be. Now my next one I've placed 3 centimetres below the waistband, and I'm just placing my button on to check that that looks all right. That's a nice gap. Now I'm doing 8 centimetres between each pin because I think that's a nice spacing for this size of button. So that's how far apart they need to be. Now I'm placing my button on the button stand fairly centrally again, and I'm going to push a pin through the buttonhole. That way I know that's where that buttonhole is going to be stitched on. That's where the threads are going to be. So again, that's where my buttonhole needs to start. Marking with the chalk where the pins are. Take the pins out because obviously you can't sew a buttonhole over pins. So basically you need to repeat that for each button position, assuming your buttons are all the same size. So you always need to practice your buttonhole on a scrap, an interfaced scrap of fabric. You can see I've marked my buttonhole as it will be marked on the actual garment. Now this is how I sew buttonholes on my domestic, or one of my domestic machines. This little gadget fits the button in, and you slide it so that it kind of measures how big the button is, so that your buttonhole will come out, in theory, the correct size. I'm attaching the foot to my machine now. That's a guide that needs to be pulled down for this process to work on this machine. So I've got my cross there and I need to put that cross where the needle is going to come down. So that's going to be, this machine works backwards first, so that's going to be the start of my buttonhole. I've got my button in, off I go. All I have to do here is put my foot down. The machine does everything for me. Incidentally, always good to practice buttonholes because my machine needs a smaller button in the button foot to make the correct size buttonhole for my buttons. Nobody wants a baggy buttonhole. So here we go, look, beautiful buttonhole, front and back, very easy one-step process. So now for my very basic Genome 7021, you have to mark both ends of the buttonhole for this one because it's much more manual process. I'm going to put the foot down over that first chalk mark and go forward. This machine goes forward first for its first step, and it's up to me to stop it accurately on that chalk mark. Then I do the second process, which is the big sort of bar tack. Now, poor old girl doesn't like going backwards, so she reluctantly does. Your machine, if it does this buttonhole, should do it properly as it goes backwards. So I have to go forwards again. I do the bar tack at the back, and then I have to do the step one again, which is the forward zigzag, to get a complete buttonhole. But she does it, so I can't complain really. There we go. Let's have a look at that one. There we go, not quite as beautiful, but it's done and it's adequate. Always check that your buttonholes come out the right size, even if it's a flashy automatic one like mine was. You can see the bar tacks fall nicely either side of the button. That is perfect. Do more than one practice as well. I'm going to check my button against all my practices there. Brilliant, that looks great. Now to cut these guys open. This is my Genome buttonhole. I'm going to just use my scissors to cut this one. This is one method. Fold it in half like this and then just snip between the zigzag stitches. It's a bit tough. Try and get your scissors in and just snip up to the bar tacks. That's one way. Another way is a buttonhole chisel. This is fairly new to me. I've never owned one before and it was a bit exciting getting to use it for the first time. Just put the mat underneath, and the blade is very, very sharp, so you have to be careful. But basically I'm just wiggling it backwards and forwards along the buttonhole gap. As you can see, it's still got a couple of threads that need a snip, but it's done a reasonable job of cutting that open. Now this method was the way that I would have done it before my chisel. I put a pin on the inside of the bar tacks on either end. These act as a barrier so I can't cut past the bar tacks that are securing the end of my buttonholes. Trusty unpicker. Pop it into the fabric and just slide it up towards the pin, and the pin just, as I said, stops you slicing all the way through the fabric. Nice clean buttonhole. Next we need to place the buttons. So again, this is my method. I'm sure there's others out there. I like to place my button stands on top of each other and pin them together so I know they're exactly where I want them to lie when the buttons are done up. And then I place a pin right at the top there of the buttonhole, just before that bar tack again, so I know that's where I want the thread holding my button onto my skirt to go for my skirt to be closed properly and for it to sit nicely. So then I just unpin that centre front, and where that pin's going into the fabric there underneath, I just slide another one in to mark it so I know that's exactly right. Obviously do that for all the buttons. So now I've marked all my buttonholes with the pin, I'm going to pop a little bit of chalk on there so I've got a nice little dot. I know exactly where my button threads need to go. So I've got my button there and I'm looking through the holes for the chalk. I'm going to put that first buttonhole, the one on the right, on that chalk. Now I've put my button under my foot and I'm just doing a zigzag. You have to do this, wheel it by hand to start with to make sure you get the right width on your zigzag machine. But you can sew them on the machine if you choose. Personally, I quite like a cup of tea and a bit of hand sew, but this is a perfectly valid way to do it. So there you go. All done. Enjoy.